Good evening, everybody. My name is Lisa Miss Kelly, and I'm with PASA Sustainable Agriculture. My role at PASA is the Diversified Vegetable Pre-Apprenticeship Manager. Um, Excited to be here with you. I was hoping actually it was going to rain tonight so that we would get a big crowd, but instead, at least here, it's like totally gorgeous. Um, but yeah, thanks so much for being here. And as I said, if you want to share where you're joining from the chat, you're welcome to do that. We love just sort of getting to know who's in the room. Um, Tonight, if folks, so the first part of this is going to be a presentation, and then we're going to move into more of a discussion. Yeah, love if folks want to participate in any way, either in the chat or by coming off mute. If people want to use the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen, or sorry if you can hear my dog in the background making weird noises, um, or if you want to add comments in the chat, either one of those is fine. And we do ask that people stay muted when they're not talking, so just so that when your dog makes weird noises in the background, like mine is, yeah, don't disturb folks who are talking. We also do encourage those who are able to come on camera just to facilitate more of a conversation. And just letting folks know that we are recording the beginning of this. I know that it's going to move into a discussion and we'll stop the recording once we move into the discussion, but we had a specific request from a few folks who are not able to make it, but had registered and did want to come. And so, yeah, if you don't want to be recorded, do keep your camera off. And then, as always with PASA events, we will have an evaluation at the end, and we do really value and appreciate your feedback. So please do tell us what you think and let us know. If you're not familiar with PASA, we are a nonprofit that supports sustainable farms and equitable food systems through education, research, and community. Oops. And the session that you are in tonight is the Advanced Vegetable Growers Discussion on Pest and Disease Management. And we are so excited to be joined by Christy and Steph Jones of Pennypack Farm and Education Center. And so I will turn it over to you all.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Hopefully everyone's having a good beginning of their season, and spring is just starting. So yeah, thank you all for coming in the middle of what's kind of getting into a busy season. So, tonight I definitely want to talk a little bit about what we do at Pennypack, but I also, also want to open up to discussions and questions, and we can hopefully, after I do a little presentation about some of our topics on pest and disease at our farm, we can chat a little bit together, or, if people aren't interested in that, I can also keep talking about what we do. Yeah, so I know this is definitely a big topic and there's a million different things that we can talk about, and there's no way I'm going to be able to cover everything tonight that we do with pest and disease, but I'll try and give a brief overview. And certainly if anyone has any questions at the end or even after the session, we're always open. Steph, who's also on the call, yeah, Steph and I are always open to answering questions over email or through our Instagram or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share just a little PowerPoint that I made for this. All right, so I just have a quick picture of one of my favorite crops. There's our potato field, definitely a big one for pest and disease control, just to start us off. So and this PowerPoint is not the prettiest, but it definitely has some good information. So I think I emailed the slides to Lisa and she can get them to everyone. So don't feel like you have to scribble down real quick, and I'll just kind of go over what we have on here. And yeah, if anybody has any questions along the way or afterwards, happy to answer them. So starting with pests, I mean, and obviously most of you will know some of these things already, but what we do on our farm is a variety of different control mechanisms. Obviously, row cover is a big one for organic farmers, just kind of protecting against pests. But I also just want to add in regards to that, thinking about the timing of insect populations and knowing sort of their cycles in terms of putting on and taking off row cover. So, things like allium leaf miner. That's a big one now that people are seeing and using row cover on all of their alliums. But you also don't want to keep your alliums covered when they're not flying, because they do a lot better when they're out, and the onions have the ability to grow their own tops and things like that outside of row cover. So we're paying very close attention to things like that. And I do want to say that Penn State has a great hotline, the Penn State Pest hotline you can call, and they'll give you reports on the allium leaf miner and whether they're flying. So that's one in particular that we keep a close eye on, so we know when to take our row cover and not promote sort of disease in our onions from being under kind of wet row cover in the summer. So another thing that we really focus on is keeping our field edges in aisleways mode. That just helps to prevent weeds from growing, in which insects can kind of live in and reproduce and grow more. So that's obviously, it's hard to always get to that. We have a part-time staffer that is a mower, which is a very lucky situation for us, but we find it really helpful and really important. And when things are well mowed, they tend to do better in terms of attracting pests. We also have a good habitat for beneficials and pest predators around us. We have both natural area around the farm, which is just, we're really lucky to have there, but we also plant a lot of beneficial pollinator crops like around the farm, and flowers, just to provide habitat. And we also do have cover crop areas going at all times of year, so that helps to provide habitat as well for beneficials. And we do try on our farm and all our practices kind of respect the entire ecosystem of the farm and create good environment for birds and other predators like surrounding the food chain. I will also say the last thing about sort of the cultural control is scouting frequently. So we are always walking our fields for looking for both pests and diseases. It is very tempting to do what I like to call drive assessment, which is when you drive past your crops and you don't get out of the truck and you just, do the sideways look at them. But, whenever possible, even if you're just doing irrigation, we just like to walk in the rows, down the rows, look at the plants, turn the leaves over, just check for what's going on. So I put this
Yeah,
first.
one thing real quick before you move on. Variety too. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
I do. Yeah, I have a topic. Yeah, I have
Okay.
a slide later. But yes, also very important. So beneficial insects, that's definitely one that we use very frequently on the farm. And I even put this, before other things that are important in terms of pest control, because of how much we feel that they're important. So we specifically work with green lacewings, which are a generalist predator. They're gonna tackle cucumber beetles, squash bugs, aphids, and a variety of other pests. So what we do is we're pretty serious about these. Like, we do it quite a few times. I think we do it maybe 3 to 4 times in the summer. We order 25,000 eggs on egg cards. You can see in the picture this little sheet of egg cards. They almost are like little tickets. I always, tell the staff, it's like, we're going to the carnival. Here's your tickets. Go put them out. So they come with lots of little cards that you can hang off of all the leaves of your plants. So you can kind of decide how many to get based on your acreage. We just always go with the maximum amount because it's just, they do such a good job. So what we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to order those like 3 to 4 times during the summer season. And we're specifically going to be focusing on putting them in crops such as cucurbits, tomatoes for aphids. We might put some in the hoop house for pepper thrips. They can go in green beans, all those other options for green bean beneficials. And I'm trying to think if there's any other major crops that we're putting them in. Yeah, if there's any crop that we feel like is under threat, I mean, these are pretty generalist predators and they're going to be able to tackle a lot of different pests, but especially for the cucurbits, for winter squashes, these are a key part of our winter squash program in terms of controlling for squash bugs and cucumber beetles. We've seen a very significant reduction on those by putting those cards out. I think we do it once or twice. just as a side note on our winter squash, and I might tackle this elsewhere, I forget if I put it anywhere else, but we do plant a trap crop of Hubbards on the edge of our butternuts, spaghettis, and other types of squash. That is a type of squash that attracts pests even more. So when you have a trap crop, the important thing is then to do pest control in your trap crop. Otherwise, it's kind of, not really doing its job. So we will put higher concentrations of these green lacewings in the trap crop of the Hubbard. So we're kind of having the whole ecosystem work for us in that case. We order them from Arbico Organics. They're a great company. They have a lot of different products. Just make sure you get the cards and not just the eggs, because they're a little easier to handle. So again, everyone should be sent these slides, so don't feel like you have to write this down, but this is the calendar of when we use beneficial insects. Some of the other ones mentioned here are beneficial nematodes. So we use the S. feltiae species, and we spray with a little spray we can put on our hose. We spray on transplants in April and early May before they go out, especially brassicas. That's because we do have seed corn maggot on our farm. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that on your farms or have dealt with that. But there's, onion maggot, seed corn maggot are pretty big problems in the spring for us. So we usually see the flies flying, and then that's when we know. If you see a lot of flies flying over your farm in the early spring, kind of late March, early April time, usually those are maggot flies laying some sort of egg that can then get your transplants and eat the roots. So I would also advise, if you see your plants in the spring kind of not doing well or growing very slowly, to dig around a little bit, because sometimes that can mean there's maggot activity that you can't even tell from the top is going on underneath. Once there's a lot of activity, you kind of just have to wait out their life cycle. The seed corn maggot has a 2 to 3 week life cycle as a maggot, then it will move into a pupal stage in which it's no longer damaging to your plants. After April, warmer temperatures, they sort of phase out. So we do order the beneficial nematodes to spray on transplants. And it's just one piece of our seed corn maggot control, the other one being trying to create beds early before the flight. So we have a multifaceted approach to that. There's our lacewings in there. And then the one other thing I wanted to point out is we do order Pediobius wasps 2 to 3 times to prevent Mexican bean beetle infestation on our green beans. And you can get those from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, actually. And then all summer, we provide flower habitat for beneficials. Okay, so then obviously there's spray options for organic control. And we do use these as well, and they're an important part of our rotation of options here. And then I kind of listed here one of the main ones that we're going to use. And again, spraying is done. We don't spray unless there's certain crops where we have found that it is necessary to do, and we know when to do it. But we're spraying only when necessary and not just whenever. I mean, we also use all those other control options as well. So these sprays are left for when it's absolutely necessary. One of our favorite pest control mixes would be Pyganic Asgard mix. I'm going to have rates for everything, all these sprays at the end. So you guys will have that available. So we do a Pyganic Asgard mix for a lot of different pests that we deal with. One of the biggest ones that really hits is potato leaf hoppers. So they tend to show up in early June, kind of hopping around potato plants. Definitely ones to look out for. They can decrease your yields by quite a bit and cause early die-off. So we find that just a spray of Pyganic Asgard maybe once or twice on the potatoes really basically does the trick and knocks them down enough. Then the potatoes can kind of do okay in the rest of their life cycle. So that would be the Pyganic Asgard mix. For that, we would also use that. I think we at times might use that for brassicas if needed, for like flea beetles and other little pests like that, and potentially white flies. And Pyganic itself might just work for those by itself. We don't use spinosad too often on our farm. It's very expensive. I'm sure some of you know that, or all of you know that. Entrust is the typical brand recommended. It's can be like $400 for a very small amount, but it also is used in a high dilution or very low dilution, or whatever, however that works. Not a lot is needed, so you can have it last for a while. The one benefit of that is, at least our friend on his farm, he uses it for allium leaf miners because he doesn't cover onions. So that is an option for that if you want to go that route instead of covering. And I know he has pretty good luck with that. And then I've also potentially heard of Entrust maybe being used when maggots are bad, if you really drench drench the situation. But that's not really a confirmed observation. So but it is an option. It can also be used for Colorado potato beetles. The one thing to note with spinosad is you shouldn't use it more than 3 times a season because it can cause resistance. Venerate's another great option. It's a biological. I believe it's a bacteria, and it works on aphids. I don't remember if it's stuff. Do you remember if it's labeled for other things?
The venerate.
Yeah, I think it's mostly aphids.
I can double check, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what we'd use it for. So aphids are a big thing, especially in dry seasons. You definitely want to be checking for aphids on your major crops like tomatoes. So tomatoes especially can have aphids, and it's harder to tell. It's not as obvious as brassicas where you turn over the leaf and they're just covered. So with the tomatoes, you kind of have to turn over the leaf and there might just be a few, but on the stems, usually they're the black ones with little wings. So if it gets bad enough, like usually what we'll do is we'll have lace wings ready to go for the tomatoes. But you know, one year we had it was a little bit worse. So it was hit it down with venerate and then put the lace wings on. So that is an option where aphids are particularly challenging. Ladybugs are also a good option for aphids. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, if you like spinosad is a broad spectrum, and I imagine affects lacewings, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I imagine it does since it is broad spectrum. And I'm just wondering, like, if you think about your timing, or if it's just a matter of that, like, your lacewings are not going to be on your garlic and onion crops, and so you're not concerned about like this sort of like bringing in beneficials and then killing them, or like how sort of you.
Sure. Oh, we absolutely think about that. We take that into very careful account. And some of these like venerate, or is it venerate? I think that might be the one where you don't want that to be on there for 24 hours to 48 hours before you put. Back when we had an aphid infestation for tomatoes, I did a lot of research onto this and sort of creating a plan that involved. So if you have a pest infestation that is kind of above threshold level and you're concerned about, what I would typically recommend is doing a knockdown of whatever is the appropriate spray and then introducing beneficials after that. Because by the time you notice the thing in the field, go in to your office and get around to ordering beneficials, and they come in the mail, then you have time to put them out, then they hatch. You're looking at now a week and a half where your pests are just chilling out there. So if it's not a planned infestation, not that there ever is one, but it's a little unexpected and it's a little more than threshold, that's when you're going to do the knockdown. But then once the green lacewings are in there, at that point you want to trust them to do the job, and you're not going to go back in with a spray that would affect them. So we do tend to put a lot of trust on the lacewings in a wide variety of situations. But definitely you have to take into account that there's a little time lapse. So you kind of want to be ready. That's why I create every winter, I create a plan for when I'm going to order the different things, the different beneficials, so that I have a reminder on my phone. Okay, now's the time to order lacewings. You get them in the tomatoes when they're young. So hopefully you knocking down things before they become a problem. But yeah, certainly you want to use a variety of things. Once your lacewings are in there and released, you don't really want to be going in and spraying stuff. So you kind of want to commit to one or the other of these options, and some of that judgment call would be made on the degree of infestation. But I personally think lacewings are just such a really good option, and I've seen beneficials do really well. I've seen For aphids, we've actually used pirate bugs before from Arbico as well as ladybugs and released them under row cover and brassicas. I've seen them do pretty good job. So I think that beneficials aren't always considered. I think people are a little scared to trust them, but at least on our farm, we've seen them do a pretty good job. Another example for us is the cucurbits. Our entire pest control for them is all lacewings. There is no other pest control on cucurbits but lacewings on our farm. So I think that for us, they've done a really nice job, but you do have to be mindful about releasing them frequently and a lot of them to make that happen. I think they're worth the expense. The last thing I wanted to mention here was BT. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. Biological, one benefit of BT, it is one of my favorites in the fact that it's not going to affect anything else, any other insect besides your caterpillars, cabbage loopers and caterpillars. I did want to mention, BT can be tank mixed with pyganic, so a wonderful option for fall brassicas would be to mix pyganic with BT. Then you're going to hit your caterpillars as well as your flea beetles all in one swoop. So that is a great tank mix option for that August brassica, kind of early fall brassicas. Another thing I want to mention is to look out for armyworms in August. So that's a little bit newer to at least something that's newer for us that we've been noticing in our area. Maybe in the last 4 to 5 years, both my friend whose farm is in Lancaster and us on our farm in Horsham have noticed that armyworms are out at higher concentrations in August when you have all your winter stuff germinating, your baby carrots, your baby beets, baby spinach. And sometimes these are so small, you're not even going to see them, but you're just gonna, that's what we found. And what he found on his farm was that you would have baby spinach that looked great germinated and then come back a couple days later and then mysteriously some of it is gone, and that's from those little tiny cutworm, like little tiny caterpillars doing that damage. So we preemptively BT baby carrots, baby beets, baby spinach, kind of anything that's really tiny at that time of year. So again, with our pest control at this point, a lot of it is knowing the cycles, knowing when to be out there and having that plan in place long ahead of time before we're seeing high infestation levels. So moving on to disease, and there's obviously a lot more to talk about with pests, and we can get into that in the discussions, and it's kind of an endless amount of things that could be discussed, but just for the sake of time, we'll move on to disease. So for disease, I think even more so than pests, preventative is the key. I mean, usually with organics, once you start seeing disease progression, it's so hard to stop it. Although we have actually a good example of being able to stop a disease that I'll go over. But for the most part, I think pests, well, they're both tricky, but preventative is definitely good. Number one, we choose our varieties based specifically on disease resistance. We grow almost exclusively hybrids on our farm. I have a great respect for heirlooms and open pollinated varieties and their place in sort of seed saving. However, for us being a production farm, and by the way, I don't think I even really went over what our farm that much in the beginning, but we're 13 acres of CSA vegetables. We have a 400-member summer CSA, 180-member winter CSA, and we donate approximately 15 to 20% of what we grow to food pantries. We try to aim to donate around 26,000 pounds a year to food pantries. So production to us is key, not only for our CSA, we also go to one farmer's market, but not only for those outlets, but because the more we can produce, the more we can donate to help with food insecurity near us. So we are focusing on hybrid varieties that can produce large amounts, uniform amounts, and have high disease resistance. We look for disease resistance codes in the catalog. You know, things like downy mildew resistance on cucumbers, different resistances, bacterial virus like resistances in tomatoes and things like that. Johnny's in general is a great breed, like they do really great breeding. And anytime a variety has been created by Johnny's breeding, I usually trust it a lot. The other thing I wanted to point out is being mindful about materials. So sanitizing seedling trays before using, sanitizing prop house at the beginning of the season, using new wooden tomato sticks if you can afford it, And also just being aware of visiting other farms, being aware of any soil compost that's being brought into your farm, anything that's brought in. I mean, we just had a big building constructed on our property, a new barn a year or two ago. And I was very adamant that, you know, the topsoil that was going to be used around it was going to be very clean, and you know, checking my sourcing, because you just don't want to bring in anything soil borne. Or, you know, there's invasive worms that you don't want to mess with too. So just being mindful of the materials that are coming and going off the farm, and just, you know, like using common sense too is big. If places are hot and wet and don't have good ventilation, like greenhouses and things like that, disease is going to be happier. So keeping that all in mind too. I specifically want to talk about tomatoes because that's everyone's favorite, you know, one of our most important crops, and also a big one for disease. So for us, we are using multiple times in the season, from when they're fairly young to when they're full grown and pretty much almost producing tomatoes, a triple threat tank mix of Stargus, Regalia, and copper. We originally were only using copper and Regalia. A couple years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a outbreak of Phytophthora fruit rot. It started on our eggplant, wiped out all of the current growing fruit on our eggplant. And we sent out samples, and we were told, oh my gosh, like your peppers are going to go down, your eggplant already went down, your tomato, like, and we started seeing a little evidence in the tomatoes. And I sent, you know, questions out to Coronel, to Rodale, to many other farmers, and I got a lot of replies like, you could lose 50% of your crop, it could go, you know, it's just, you don't have a great hope. In our sampling that went out, we got a result that Rodale kind of thought was unheard of, and that our fruit tested positive for Phytophthora, but our roots did not. And then when I kind of told Rodale that we did this tank mix and we essentially stopped it in its tracks and prevented the tomatoes had a great crop, and the peppers did not get it at all, despite being next to the tomatoes. And all their scientists there kind of were like, this case study is unbelievable. Like, we've never heard of this before, this being so successful and kind of knocking us down. And I did some further research, and I really think soil health was a big thing to do with it. So taking care of your soil is huge in preventing these things from really taking hold. But also we really got on top of it extremely quickly. But this tank mix, I think to me, I was surprised, knowing that usually once you see disease evidence in tomatoes, there's no way to stop it. However, in this case, we pretty much stopped it. I mean, we started spraying before the tomatoes were even ripe, and we started noticing some fruit rot, started spraying this mix. We stopped it in its tracks and had a great tomato season with almost no evidence of there being a disease present. So I'm very, you know, I'm a big believer in this mix now, having seen what it can do. That being said, obviously every year is different, and you never know what's coming. So I don't want to jinx us. Like, it's always give you the next challenge. Stargus is a product that not everyone has heard of. It's not as common, but it's a biological. It coats the leaves with beneficial bacteria. That's a great option. I mean, anytime you can use beneficial bacteria, it's just, to me, I think a lot of times when I talk about soil health and plant health, I compare it to ourselves and our own kind of microbiome. You think about how probiotics and things like that work for us. It's kind of the same thing. So very rarely do we use kind of more sanitizing options like oxidate or things like that, because it is better to get the beneficial bacteria to be crowding out bad ones. So Stargus is a great option for that. We also will do that on our peppers. Regalia, a lot of you probably have heard of that one. It boosts the plant's immune system. Great organic option, and honestly can be used in so many situations. Just even if plants look like they're struggling a little bit, Regalia is a great option to get them going a little bit. If there's bad weather, if it's cold out and nightshades are unhappy, if it hails and hurts some leaves, Regalia can be a great product, not only just as a fungicide, but to kind of boost the plant. Copper for tomatoes. We only use copper on tomatoes. We won't use it. Oh, actually, we do use it on cucumbers now, because downy mildew is so prevalent at this point. We use New Cop, which is not a very common one, but that one is the only one that I know of that's labeled for Phytophthora, so we do like that one. Again, I'll have rates at the end. So that is our tomato disease plan, 7 to 10 days. We have a tractor mounted sprayer and we'll do this mix. For our other nightshade, like peppers, we'll do regalia and stargus. And I will say that we actually stopped spraying our peppers as much because the yields were so incredibly high the times that we did. Like one year we sprayed regalia and stargus 3 or 4 times and the yields were just so astronomical, and we were like, okay, we don't want to harvest as many peppers, so we're not going to be this nice to them anymore. But I will say we found that it not only prevented disease, it boosted the plants, gave us a great yield, at least in that year that we observed that. Do be mindful of leaf burn. Obviously, that's always the case. Copper, you know, make sure it can dry. Do it in the evenings. Don't do it in bright sun. All that stuff. Also, remember that for any spraying, you can always check your UV index, because sometimes that's when burn happens, even if it's later at night. If your UV index is like 6 or 7, a really bright night, you can still get leaf burn. So we like to look at our UV index being, you can look that up online, your current UV index, you can look it up hourly. We tend to like to spray when it's down below 5, like 3 or 4 would be better. Other practices we use, we do sometimes mix oxidate into our potting soil to help with dampening off for chenopod's like beets and chard. I didn't have the rate for that. Steph might be able to type something that's helpful in the chat if anybody's interested in that, because she manages that part of things. Keeping greens and hoop houses vented in the winter, that's really important, like I said. Being aware of insects that can spread disease, fungus gnats in the greenhouse, obviously whiteflies, cucumber beetle, squash bugs. Another post-harvest disease control practice is you can use white vinegar sometimes for some of the things like winter squash. So we will get just straight up huge, like a gallon of white vinegar from our local grocery store, put it in spray bottles, don't mix it with anything else. Just, you want to wipe the squash off of dirt first, and then we call it the squash wash. So no water, you just kind of wipe them off with well, actually I think we might use I think no water. You just wipe off the dirt and then you do the vinegar spray. Sometimes we'll do that in the field during harvest. So we'll create piles of acorn squash, and then we'll have people behind, you know, the initial harvesters wiping off the dirt and then spraying everything with white vinegar. That helps to keep the skin a little bit better for storage. And also on our farm, we tend to harvest on the earlier side to avoid fruit rots. So we try not to leave produce in the fields too long. So we will harvest butternuts maybe like a week before the average, you know, harvest recommendation time, things like that. If our potatoes are ready, we try our best to get out there and get them in. Same thing with carrots. If we can't get out there and get them in, we make sure to stop the irrigation in the field so that it's not getting more water. If it's to size, we make sure, you know, and that can even mean making sure that when you're watering the entire field that you go check and make sure those lines are off, because sometimes that's easy to miss. So we're definitely mindful of not irrigating stuff that's at full size and ready to go. And there's the spray rates. You guys will get this email to you, but if anyone wants to take like a shot with their phone, you could do that too. Those are the ones we use on our farm. I always find it so hard to find spray rates, so I wanted to try to make these available because I find that really frustrating.